Hi, and welcome to another week of the How to Become an Entrepreneur series. So, there's a lot of discussion about the necessity to go to a business school or any school in order to become a successful entrepreneur. And most sources that, at least that I've read, would say no, you don't. And I agree with that. It's definitely not a necessity, in my opinion. And I mean, there are so many great examples that really prove that it isn't necessary. For example, you have Blake Mykowski, if I pronounce that correctly, from Tom's. He's actually a dropout, I believe, and he taught himself to like all the ins and outs of entrepreneurship just by reading the biographies of already successful entrepreneurs, and he learned everything he needed from that, and he went on to create a very successful business. However, I think that there are definitely also some benefits to going to a business school or just a school in general that really tend to be left out. And not to say that, oh, you have to do this and you have to go to school. I'm not saying that, but I think it's also valuable to know the benefits of business school and school in general as well. Yeah, so therefore I would like to discuss my perspective and my point of view on the necessity of business school for a successful entrepreneurial pathway. So I think generally speaking, there are four main advantages to going to a school, and maybe more specifically than a business school. The first one would be creative thinking. So in my experience, you really learn how to think more creatively. So for example, my university uses a system called PBL, or problem-based learning, and the essence of it is that you are presented with a problem or an issue, and then through the literature that is assigned, you find solutions or you answer certain questions related to the issue, etc., etc. And I don't know about other universities. I know not all universities have this particular system, but I think in general, universities or schools help you with, starting to think out of the box, more creative about solving issues. And since you are often with other students and you have to discuss these issues together, it really enhances your skills of creative thinking, in my opinion. Of course, it has to be noted that this is not something inherent to school. I mean, through work experience, you can also learn the exact same thing, maybe even better. So yeah, it's not something inherent to schools, but it is definitely something you learn there. So for the second benefit, I would definitely say networking. It's also, I think, one of the biggest benefits of schools. And so not only can you build up a network by, engaging with your fellow students, they will end up somewhere in life. And but you can also really tap into the networks of your professors, or just have your professors be part of that network. So yeah, it's a really great place to build that up. And also, usually universities or schools host a lot of networking events as well, and they're completely for free. I mean, you pay tuition, so what is free? But yeah, it's all incorporated usually into the curriculum, and that's really nice. And then the third benefit would definitely be having the status of being a student. And with that, I don't mean like, oh, being all posh and like, look at me. But it's more about the fact that I've noticed myself now that as a student, other companies and just people in general are so much more willing to help me, because it also gives them certain credits and like feeling of legitimacy, like, oh, I'm so nice because I helped the student and la 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 la. Yeah, like, I don't know, of course, all the motivations, but I've noticed that people are a lot more willing to help 22-year-olds like me that are students just because I'm a student, versus 22-year-olds that, I don't know, are not students, that are working or whatever. For instance, for a project, I had to interview some CEOs, and I thought it would be so difficult to just find a CEO that will want to make the time to talk to us. However, it was so easy. And not only for me, also for my fellow students, it was so easy to find CEOs that were willing to talk. And we talked about that with our professor, and he was like, yeah, you know, generally towards students, like CEOs in this case, are really, really willing to help. And I'd say the fourth and also very big benefit is the easy access to literature and learning materials in general. Of course, you can find your own materials, find your own books, buy them, read them, etc. That's definitely a possibility, but I think if you have to do that by yourself, you first have to put in a lot of hours just to finding the literature and then hoping that it's actually helpful literature. Whereas in university or in school, the teachers already pre-select literature for you. And, you know, this saves you a lot of time. Sometimes also money. I mean, it depends a bit. Sometimes you still have to buy the articles or the books yourself. Other times it is provided to you by university. But I mean, if you do it by yourself, you would have to pay for it anyway as well. So it can be a bit more cost efficient. But again, you're also paying tuition, so how efficient is it really? So yeah, that definitely just saves you a lot of time and effort in that aspect. However, there are also, of course, some drawbacks to being in school or being in university, at least in my perspective. They aren't like really huge issues or even issues that everyone will encounter. I think that's something more on an individual level as well, and like more open to interpretation, I'd say. However, I still think to some extent they're generally applicable as being disadvantages. The first one actually relates to my last point of advantages, and that's thinking inside the box. Of course, I just said that on the one hand you learn creative thinking, and as a fourth point, literature is provided for you and everything, and that's really nice. However, this can also lead you, it can bind you in a way, you know. If you're not aware of it, there's also so much more information out there, and usually you just learn a perspective out of the million perspectives that are out there. If you don't realize that, you can really get trapped, you know, in like a tunnel vision, I'd say. So that's something you really have to be aware of, that in school you only learn one or two or whatever perspectives, whereas there are so many more out there, and there's also always so much more information out there and so much more literature out there to read. And maybe just because you learn in university that something doesn't work in research, there can actually be plenty of practical evidence of people that show that it is actually possible. So in that sense, I would definitely say be careful with schools, that you aren't limited by the ways of thinking that you are taught in the curriculum. And then the second one, I think this generally applies mostly to universities, is the lack of practical knowledge you learn. Depending on your university, you will definitely get practical knowledge, and you will have like more projects that maybe, well, in my case, and would involve working with businesses or whatever. And that's really great. But overall, the purpose of universities is academia, you know, it's research. So even in the most practical universities, it's not a lot of practice, I think. I mean, university versus actually doing and working, it will always be less than the actual doing and working. So that's also definitely a drawback. I mean, alternatively, you can of course work somewhere outside of university hours or something. So in that way you can bridge the gap, or start working during your summers or other holidays, something like that. But it's definitely something to be aware of, that just because you learn something in university doesn't mean it works the same way practically. So therefore it's very important to also pay attention to the practical knowledge. And I think people like Blake Makowski that didn't focus on the academia and rather just went out there and did stuff, that's really their benefit, you know, because they got that practical knowledge, and through practice you learn as well. So in conclusion, is it necessary to go to a school or business school in order to become a successful entrepreneur? No, absolutely not. At least not in my opinion. I think it's definitely the will and not the skill. However, the skill can most definitely help. So in that sense, I think you can definitely get some great advantages from going to specific schools, as long as you are also aware of the drawbacks. So I think that's the main getaway of this, that if you want to go to school, do it. I mean, there are plenty of benefits to going to school. Just be aware of the drawbacks that are there and try to maybe overcome them as much as possible. If you don't want to go to school or you can't go to school, then don't let it limit you whatsoever. Again, maybe be aware of the drawbacks there. So for example, that you would have to invest a little bit more time into finding resources, finding information, building your network, really get out there to do those things, because it will be a bit more difficult and require a bit more effort, but don't let it limit you whatsoever, I'd say. And also to inspire you, I found a few interviews that I thought were very helpful and interesting for people that aspire to be entrepreneurs. I'll leave them in the subscription box down below, and yeah, definitely check them out, I'd say. So thank you for watching. That was it for this video. Next week we will be discussing the first steps that you have to take if you want to create a business. And definitely don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this video. If you prefer to see other content, or you have certain issues or subjects that you would like to see discussed, definitely let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, see you next week. Bye.